Hello all, and today we will discuss how we can leverage Cloudfront to access S3 bucket content, create an origin access identity, and finally create an invalidation request to ensure that our content is flushed out of all the edge locations. Okay, so let us quickly jump into the demo. So this is my AWS account, and to speed up things, I have actually created a bucket. My bucket name is, this is my S3 bucket for demo. This is a private bucket. It's not open to public, as you see. So let's click on this bucket. I have added 3 files in over here. As you see, there are 3 files. There is an index.html, there's nam.html, there's error.html. For each of these files, you will see that there's one version over here for error.html. For index.html, I have about 3 versions, and for nam.html, I again have one version. So let us review through the rest of the bucket's properties before we move to CloudFront. Okay, so if I go back and I click on properties, as you see, versioning for our bucket is on, and we did see a bunch of versions for our files. Rest of the other properties are disabled. I've added one tag. I click on this, you can see the key is name and the value is demo. Other than that, everything else is disabled. As far as the permissions for this bucket is concerned, let's review the permissions. So as you see, this bucket is completely private. There is no public access that is granted to anybody, even to list the objects or read any specific objects or object permissions from this bucket. So this bucket is not accessible publicly. There are no bucket policies associated. As you see, it's blank. And as far as the course configuration is concerned, there is no course configuration associated as well. If I click on management, you will see that there are no lifecycle rules, replication, analytics, matrix, or inventory, or anything of that sort that is associated. So in short, this is a very simple bucket which has 3 files, and out of that, this one particular file index.html has 3 versions. Okay, so what we will do in this demo is we will basically create a CloudFront distribution to access the content of this bucket, which is a completely private bucket, over the web. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on services and then click on CloudFront. Okay, so in order to create a distribution, we need to click on create distribution. So let's click on create distribution right here. And this gives us 2 options. So as you see, there are 2 options. Select a delivery method for your content. One is web, and the second one is RTMP. Now, RTMP stands for real-time messaging protocol, and that is generally used for any kind of streaming media. See, it's mentioned right here. Any kind of streaming media that you might have. Let's say if you have any audios or videos or something to be streamed, you can certainly use this particular distribution type. Okay, but in our case, as you saw, we just have simple HTML files. We do not have any streaming media or live streaming or audio video files. Hence, we will not be using RTMP, but instead we will be using the web method. And as you see, it is generally the preferred method for HTML, CSS, PHP, or any other graphic files like images, etc. And the method that we will be using will be either HTTP or HTTPS. In our case, we will be using HTTP. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on get started. Okay, so the first thing that we have to select over here is the origin domain name. So let's go ahead and click in this box. And the moment you click, you will see that there are a couple of different types of origins that Cloudfront supports. So first one is an Amazon S3 bucket. The other one is Elastic Load Balancers. This is basically for websites or something. If you have any media packages and if you have any media stores. For this demo, what we will be using is our S3 bucket. Remember, we had created this S3 bucket. This is my S3 bucket for demo. So we will be leveraging this S3 bucket. So let's go ahead and select that. Okay, origin path is going to be blank. And this is our origin ID, which is our S3 bucket's name. The next question that it does ask us is, do you want to restrict bucket access? Now, if you want, you can click on no, but I would not want my bucket to be accessed by anybody other than this distribution network that I'm trying to create. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on yes. The moment you click on yes, as you see, you got this option of origin access identity. So that essentially tells us that, hey, do you want to create any specific identity? Okay, and in this case, we will have to because we are restricting access. So if you want to create a new identity, you can go ahead and create a new identity, or you can use an existing identity. But the idea behind this is basically to create an identity that will be granted access to our S3 bucket. Okay, so for this demo, we will create a new identity. The moment you click on new identity, you will see that there's an identity name that has popped up, access hyphen identity hyphen the bucket name right here, dot s3 amazon aws.com. So it will essentially create an identity of on the following lines. Okay, now the next question after this is grant read permissions on bucket. Now, if you want, you can modify or grant permissions later on. But for this demo, what we will do is we will click on yes. And since we are selecting yes, it will actually go inside and update the bucket policy. Remember a few minutes back, we had actually checked the bucket policy and it was empty. After this distribution is created, it will actually go back and update that identity. So update the bucket policy with the origin access identity having the right to read permissions to go ahead and read any content that is present in our bucket. If you want, you can possibly go ahead and add any custom headers over here. In our case, we do not. Now let's move on to the default cache behavior settings. So obviously the path pattern is default. Viewer policy protocol policy. So for this particular demo, we will be using HTTP and HTTPS because we have index HTML files and any kind of allowed HTTP methods. Now you could go in for get head in options, or possibly with post, put, patch, or delete. But for this demo, I'm only going to restrict it to get and head. Now, one thing I will certainly draw your attention to is to the fact that what HTTP methods are cached. So as you see, by default, head and get are cached. But if I go ahead and change this to get head and options, I do get an option of caching options. Okay, so you will get an option if you want to check it, you can check it. Otherwise, you can just keep it unchecked. But for this demo, we will be using get and head. So I'm going to switch back to that. Okay, so the next one is cache based on selected request headers. Now you could potentially cache on, all headers, although as you see, it is not recommended to do something like that. The best option is to select whitelist. Then you will notice that it actually gives you a bunch of headers right here. So you could say, hey, I want to cache on authorization, or I want to cache on origin. Those are some of the common headers, but otherwise you could potentially use any of the headers that I mentioned here. For this demo, I'm just going to keep it on none. Okay. And that just makes it easy. And we'll proceed further ahead. Now, if we want to customize object caching and the time to live, TTL essentially stands for time to live. You could certainly do that. Now, by default, you could use the default options. And as you see, the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 315.36.000. That essentially stands for the number of seconds in a year. So the minimum TTL, maximum TTL, and the default TTL is essentially the time that you need to mention in seconds. Now let us go and customize this. So we'll say, hey, minimum is 0, but maximum I would like to keep it for 300 seconds, which is about 5 minutes. And the default, I would want to keep it, let's say, about 200. Okay. We would not want to forward any cookies or query strings, smooth streaming, and all that is not applicable. Viewer restricted access, no. Compare objects automatically, no. We're not using any Lambda functions. I'm going to move further to distribution settings now. Now, if you go ahead and click on price class, it will actually give you the different regions, or essentially a bunch of regions grouped together depending upon which you will be charged. So for my demo, I'm going to go ahead and select US, Canada, and Europe. I don't have any WAFs for this because it's just a simple bunch of HTMLs. But yeah, if you require a web application firewall, then feel free to go ahead and select that. I don't have any alternate domain names, and I'm going to use the default Cloudfront certificate. But if you want, you could use a custom SSL with your domain name. And finally, for any kind of HTTP versions that I'm supported for this particular distribution, I'm just going to keep at HTTP to 1.1 and 1.0, and rest of the other settings, I'm going to keep it as default. Now, as you see, enable IPv6 is checked. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and check that, or you can just leave it checked by default. And moment we click on create distribution, we would want our distribution state to be enabled. So I'm going to click have enabled selected right there. So now let's go ahead and click on create distribution, and that will create this distribution for us. Okay, so our CloudFront distribution has been created. So let's go ahead and click on distributions right there. And you should see that this is been enabled, but although the status is in progress. Now it takes about roughly, in my experience, about 10 minutes, or maybe sometimes even 15, to have this in a deployed state, okay? But meanwhile, while this is being provisioned to us, let us go ahead and review the properties for this that we had just selected. So if you click on the ID, you will see that these are the properties, and it has actually also given us a domain name. So this is the domain by which we will access our CloudFront distribution. So let's go ahead and copy that. And I'm going to copy this in a notepad. So this is our domain name. And as you see, IPv6 is enabled. Our origin is our S3 bucket. As you see, the S3 bucket is right here. We have one default behavior. As you see, the protocol is HTTP and HTTPS. Do we have any error pages? Now, if you remember, when in my bucket, I had one error.html. So let us go ahead and select that as an error response. So let's say if it's a forbidden access, okay, then we would want to customize our error response. I'm going to say /error.html, and the response code is bad request. And I'm going to say click on create. Okay. And any restrictions? So the geo restriction is disabled. Invalidations. I don't have any invalidations right now, but once our distribution is up, we will create an invalidation request for this particular demo and tags. So if you want to go ahead and create a tag, you can go ahead and create a tag. For example, you can say name and then S3 distribution and click on save. And a tag has been added. Okay, so if you remember, one of the things that we had mentioned was to have this identity created. So let's go ahead and click on origin access identity. And as you see, you can see that comment right there that we had. So this is the identity that has been created for us. And if you click on edit, you'll be able to see the ID, the comment right there by which you can identify it easily. So this is for our bucket. Okay, I'm not going to make any changes to this now. So this particular identity has been created. Now, along with creating the identity, we had also mentioned that we wanted to update our bucket policy and grant this particular identity access to read content from our bucket. So let us go ahead and review our bucket. So click on services, go to S3. And a bucket list should come up shortly. So there's a bucket right there. If you click on this bucket, this is a demo bucket. It's still not public as you saw. But if we go ahead and click on permissions, and if I go ahead and now click on bucket policy, you will see that there is a policy associated now. This is a policy. Okay, I'm going to copy this in Notepad so that you can read it easily. Oops, this did not come out formatted. Hold on. Okay, so let me try and open a new file over here. Okay, so this is our policy, and hopefully this is legible. Let me just zoom in a little more. There you go. Okay, so this is our ID, and as you see, it's giving allow. The effect is allow to this particular principle. Now, this is the ARN of our Cloudfront origin access identity. As you see, it's right there. And it is allowing it to perform get object on S3 and specifically on our bucket right there. So this is the policy that has been associated with a bucket. Okay, so now let's go back to our CloudFront and check if that has been provisioned or not. So let's click on CloudFront and let's see if our distribution has been deployed. It is still in progress. So what I'll do is I'll pause the demo over here for a little bit. It might take a few more minutes, and once it is provisioned and deployed, then I will resume recording. As you see, our CloudFront distribution has been deployed. It's right there. So now we should be able to access this over the web. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy our URL right here. So this is our CloudFront distribution URL. So let's go and copy that right there. And as you see, since I had not specified any specific file named, for example, index.html or nam.html, it went directly to error.html because we had actually set up an error page for our CloudFront distribution. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try and access index.html. So this is my index.html. As you see, this is version 3. I have a few links over here. I can also fetch or get basically nam.html. This is my nam.html. I'm basically able to access my content over CloudFront, okay? And my S3 bucket is still private. And remember that this content is being accessed by CloudFront using the origin access identity that we had created. And that is the identity that has access to our S3 bucket. Okay, so now since we have seen how to go ahead and access our content using CloudFront, the next step would be how do we go about creating an invalidation request. So for example, as you see, we had basically created customized settings for our TTL, time to live. But let's say if you had a newer version of your file, okay? So there are two ways to kind of invalidate or basically tell CloudFront that, hey, this data is stale. You need to go back and get a newer version from the origin. So one way is basically to create an invalidation request, and the moment you create an invalidation request, it will basically flush out the older version from all the edge locations. Or the other thing that you can do is create a newer version of the file, and what typically is recommended that you kind of append a version number to the file. So for example, I could have index-1.html-2 or _2.html, or with any particular file name, you could potentially tag or append a version number. Okay, so let us try to create an invalidation request. So we go back into our CloudFront distribution, click on invalidations, and then click on create invalidation. And here we need to enter the name. So let's say I'm going to say index.html, and I'm going to say go ahead and invalidate this. Okay, so as you see, it's in progress, and it typically takes a few minutes for this invalidation to ensure that it is propagated to all the edge locations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video till the time that this is being deployed and the content has been flushed out. So as you see, our invalidation request has been completed. The status has changed. So one of the things that we will do is we will go ahead and actually upload a newer version of our index.html. So this is my index.html. As you see, this has the older version, and I'm going to change this version to version 4. And I'm going to save this file, and we will go ahead and upload this file to our bucket. So let's click on that, and let's click on upload, add files. This is my index.html, which I just changed. So remember, we had 3 versions already. I'm creating the 4th version now. We're going to click next, upload, and a new index.html has been uploaded. So now if I go back and I try to access my index.html, it should actually go back to the origin, which is our S3 bucket, and fetch the latest version. So let us try that. Let's click on index.html. So still having version 3. It's not. So although it said it's completed, but there you go. Now it is saying version 4. So I had to send a request again, and that's when it said it has version 4 now. Probably the first one was coming from browsers cache, but that should not happen. That's a possibility. But as you see, that our version 4 is now available, and it is available and probably cached at most of the edge locations. Okay guys, so that's pretty much it from me for today. So as you saw, we learned today how we can access S3 content using CloudFront, how we can create origin access identity, and how we can create invalidation requests to basically invalidate any of the cached content, forcing CloudFront to go back to the origin and get the latest and the greatest copy. One of the key things to keep in mind, please remember to delete your CloudFront distribution and other resources that you might have provisioned for this demo. It is very important. It takes a while to delete it. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete my CloudFront distribution. But please ensure that you delete your CloudFront distribution. Otherwise, you can potentially incur some unwanted cost. Okay, so it's very simple to delete it. Just go ahead and first disable. Okay, and click on yes and close. Now, as you see, its status is currently in progress and the state is disabled. But once it is completed, then it will give you, if you select this, then this delete option will be enabled. Okay, so it typically takes a while, just like it took a while for it to get deployed. It takes a while for it to unregister itself and be available for deletion. But please ensure that you delete your resources. Okay, that's pretty much it from me today. Please feel free to post your comments or let me know if you would like me to create a video on any specific topic, and I can certainly have that created and uploaded for you. So thank you, and have a nice day, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.